It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and on today's show, we're taking a look at the 5 films of October 20th, 2006. And on today's show, we have 5 notable new releases. The latest film from Christopher Nolan, one of the 2 films from Clint Eastwood to end the year, a remake of a family classic, the latest film from Sofia Coppola, her follow-up to Lost in Translation, and Ryan Murphy, after many years on Nip Tuck, comes to the big screen with his directorial debut. So before we get to those movies, let's talk about the biggest new release of the weekend, which is Christopher Nolan's star-studded magician thriller, The Prestige. In the story of The Prestige, it's set in London in the 1800s, where you have 2 rival magicians played by Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, who read each other's diaries containing the secrets of their magic tricks and their personal lives. As we go back in time when the diaries were written, both magicians become obsessed with their rival's best trick. The tricks, as shown to the audience, look the same, but neither magician can figure out how his opponent does it. It's a battle, basically, between 2 magicians, and adding a little bit of what Christopher Nolan does so well, and you've got another fantastic film. Now, keep in mind, this movie is very interesting for a number of different reasons. One, it's his first big movie after Batman Begins, and this was before everyone considered him a box office draw and a critical darling, because his movies beforehand were hits, but they weren't the gargantuan hits that they have become nowadays. And I think at the time, this was seen as a little bit of an underperforming movie at the box office, even though it made back its budget of $40 million, and it had both Touchstone and Warner Brothers, Disney and Warner Brothers, behind the film. And it's a film that most people see as kind of the lesser of the Christopher Nolan movies, from what I remember, but I mean, I remember really liking the hell out of this movie. I mean, yeah, it's hard to top Batman Begins, which was his magnum opus at the time, but man, this is such a good movie, and it still holds up really well after all these years, and it's gotten even better than when you think about it. You got a star-studded cast that includes Michael Caine as well, Scarlett Johansson, Rebecca Hall, Andy Serkis, David Bowie as Nikola Tesla, which I think is the most criminally underrated performance in the movie. I mean, David Bowie just shines whenever he's on screen as Tesla, no pun intended. But the movie is visually gorgeous, too, and it's an engaging mystery thriller. Like, you really don't know how these magicians, who's going to come out on top in this, and there's really 2 different sides to each story, and the film does a very good job of expanding the details of how these magicians do their craft and how one is going to upstage the other and who's going to come out on top in the end. You really don't know who's going to come out on top until you see the film, and what they do with it is very well done. And it features a lot of the same people that made Batman Begins work in terms of the production crew. The cinematographer is back for this, so is the production designer, the editor, and of course many people from Batman Begins, including Bale and Caine. I mean, just a lot of this movie just works incredibly well. It's a wonderfully put together movie, an engaging mystery, a really enjoyable film. I love the hell out of it. I've got nothing else more to say about this film that hasn't already been said. Just a fantastic film. If you have not seen The Prestige, you're doing yourself a huge disservice, especially if you've seen a lot of Christopher Nolan's other great works. This is definitely one that's a must-see. I highly recommend The Prestige. So with all that said, let's go ahead and move on to our next film, and that's Clint Eastwood's latest film, the first of his 2 World War II movies, Flags of Our Fathers. So yeah, we've got 2 very interesting projects from Clint Eastwood released in this year. I mean, we've got 2 movies that are centering around World War II, and they meet together with Letters from Iwo Jima coming at the end of the year. But Flags of Our Fathers is based off the book of the same name, and it's about the 1945 Battle of Iwo Jima, the 5 Marines and 1 Navy corpsmen who were involved in raising the flag of Iwo Jima and the after effects of that event of their lives. And, of course, it led to one of the most famous pictures in the history of photography. And this film takes the American viewpoint of the battle for Iwo Jima, and then there's another film, the other film, Letters from Iwo Jima, has it from the Japanese perspective. And it's one half of a very interesting idea to have 2 different movies from 2 different viewpoints of the Battle of Iwo Jima. It's an interesting concept, but of the 2 movies, I think Letters from Iwo Jima is the far superior film. It's not that this movie is bad by any means necessary, but I think it's more of a disappointment, mostly because one of the performances, I think, really stand out on their own. I think they're the best thing about the film, but the story overall doesn't really come together as well as you think it should. And there's 2 really good writers involved in here, William Boyles Jr. and Paul Haggis. Paul Haggis, of course, had just won the Oscar for Crash the year before, and William Boyles Jr. wrote the script for Castaway a couple years ago. But there's nothing interesting or exciting about the story that should be very interesting that puts it over the top to make it something in it as enjoyable as it should be. It just kind of fails to find that same motivation and pull that the other war films like Saving Private Ryan, Platoon, and Apocalypse Now have. Like, why those movies are still so memorable even after all these years later. And, you know, kind of like what I said before, I think a lot of the heart and soul and the real effort that into this two-part film really goes into the second film. It kind of fits into a number of two-part movies that we've gotten over the years, like The Hunger Games, Harry Potter. You know, the first film usually isn't that good, but then the second film really delivers all the good stuff you were expected to see, and you can use that in this case as well. I think it's a very well-made film. It's a good, I mean, this movie has its good intentions, but I think the second movie definitely is a lot better. We're going to delve into that when we get to December, because that comes out at the end of the year. But in terms of Flags of Our Fathers, it's okay. It's not a bad movie, but it's definitely a disappointing film that I really expected a whole lot more from in general. But for what it is, it's serviceable. But like I said, the other film that Clint Eastwood did later in the year is a much better movie, and I highly recommend that one over this one. But it is kind of required viewing to watch both of those, so you get a good grasp of what you're trying to accomplish here. But I digress. But let's go ahead and move on to the next movie we have here, and that is... And now I can't remember again. I literally just said it at the top of the show. Oh, now I remember now, because I just looked at it. Let's take a look at the remake of Flicka. So in this film, you have a coming-of-age story set in the mountain vistas, where you have a headstrong 16-year-old played by Alison Lohman, whose desire to work on her family's mountainside horse ranch, although her father, played by Tim McGraw, insists she finishes boarding school. She finds a Mustang in the hills near her ranch and then sets her mind to tame a Mustang and prove to her father she can run the ranch. But when tragedy happens, it will take all the love and strength the family can muster to restore hope. And yeah, this is a pretty bad movie. I mean, first of all, she's supposed to be 16 years old. Alison Lohman was 27 years old when this movie was being made. So there's your first mistake right there. And I know that some actresses can look like teenagers in their teens, but at the same time, like, she was 27 years old when that came out. There's your first sign that the movie's not going to work altogether. And the other sign is that we've seen this movie done before way too many times. There have been much better movies that have been done this so much better. Like we talked about Dream of the year before with Dakota Fanning and also Kurt Russell, which I thought was a really good movie, a criminally underrated film. But this film in particular, yeah, it just doesn't work as a whole. It feels like it's trying to sell the soundtrack for Tim McGraw than it actually is trying to tell a story. And I think it really suffers because of that. And because we've seen this story done so many times before, there are much better movies that can do this, where it can be very compelling and very interesting. But this film doesn't have any of that per se. And you're just kind of bored watching the film in general. And it really hurts the ebb and flow of the film when you can't get invested in this, because you've seen this done so much better in other movies. And it's hardest in the right place, but the execution just doesn't work overall, and I really do not like this movie as a whole. So yeah, a hard skip on Flicka. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to the next one we have here, and that's Sofia Coppola's follow-up to Lost in Translation, Kirsten Dunst in Marie-Antoinette. So the film is an impressionistic retelling of Marie-Antoinette's life as a young queen, played by Kirsten Dunst, in the opulent and eccentric court at Versailles. The film focuses on Marie-Antoinette as she matures from a teenage bride to a young woman, and eventually Queen of France. Now, this is the first film, like I said, for Coppola after Lost in Translation, so there are a lot of big shoes to fill, because Lost in Translation is such a masterpiece of a movie. And kind of like with The Prestige, this did not get the proper respect it deserved at the time when it came out. It was actually kind of seen as a flop, but as time has gone on, it has eventually gotten the good following that it definitely deserves. And I remember liking the movie at first. I will admit that I saw it kind of as a letdown, especially after Lost in Translation. But it is a movie that has indeed grown on me, and it's grown on me mostly because of the performances. Kirsten Dunst, I think, is spectacular as Marie-Antoinette. You have a cast that also includes Jason Schwartzman, Judy Davis, Steve Coogan, Rip Torn, Rose Byrne, Molly Shannon, Danny Houston. Just a lot of top talent overall. And I like that it's a different kind of movie from Sofia Coppola. It's not just the same movie we saw for her from Lost in Translation. She's experimenting a little bit more with this movie in terms of the camera style, the way she's shooting the film in general, and I think it works very well to the film's advantage. I think it's a very eclectically put together film, a very nicely put together film that feels very different from the last thing she did. You can tell that she clearly is evolving and trying to do something different compared to what she did before, and I thought it worked very well. I think the film overall is really enjoyable. I think Kirsten Dunst really gives a great performance that probably should have gotten a lot more attention than it deserved, but it's a fantastic film. I highly recommend it. It's one of Sophia Coppola's most underrated movies, in my opinion. One that's definitely worth checking out, and I highly recommend it, Marie-Antoinette. So let's go ahead and move on to our last film that we have here, and that is Ryan Murphy's Running with Scissors. This is based off of a book called Running with Scissors, and it's the story of how a boy was abandoned by his mother and how he later abandoned her. The year he'll be 15, the parents of Augustine Burroughs divorce, and his mother, played by Annette Bening, who thinks of herself as a fine poet on the verge of fame, delivers him to the eccentric household of her psychiatrist, Dr. Finch. During that year, Augustine avoids school, keeps a journal, and practices cosmetology. His mother's mental illness worsens as he takes an older lover. He finds friendship with Finch's younger daughter, and he's the occasional recipient of gifts from an unlikely benefactor. Can he survive to come of age? And like I said before, this is Ryan Murphy's directorial debut. He had done work previously for Nip Tuck, and certainly not become the Ryan Murphy that we know of today, where he's pretty much everywhere, and not everything he does as a director has worked overall. And as far as feature directorial efforts go, he is 0 for 3 pretty much. I'm saying theatrical releases because I know he did one movie for HBO, which was actually pretty good. I think it was The Normal Heart. It had Jim Parsons in it, but yeah, this movie was not that. Eat, Pray, Love was a terrible movie. The Prom was a terrible movie. This might be his best overall feature film as a director, but it ain't that great either. It's a movie that has a lot of top talents in here. It's besides Alec Baldwin and Annette Bening, you got Brian Cox, Evan Rachel Wood, Gabrielle Union, Jill Clayburgh, Gwyneth Paltrow. A lot of really good talent in the film, but unfortunately, the script overall really is generic, and it feels like you have two different mindsets coming together. You got Ryan Murphy's work and this work of this author, Augustine Burroughs, that really do not mesh together at all, and you could feel it right from the get-go, and it's kind of a dull movie, too. There's really not a lot about this movie where I felt like I got behind the characters. I knew exactly what they were supposed to be like, and I thought that I could get behind them, and you really can't figure that with this particular film, and it really does struggle to find its way. It really does struggle to find a way to work overall and make me interested in what the characters are going through here, and like I said, I think it's mostly because you can't really get behind these characters because they're not written very well, and we've seen stories like this done so much better. And yeah, you can throw as many top talented people as you want to in here, but if the story isn't that good, then it isn't worth working in my opinion. And sadly, the movie does not work. It's a film that has brief aspects of promise to it. Some of the performances can work fine, but there's nothing about it that makes it worthy in the end. But like I said before, it's the best thing this guy's directed in terms of his theatrical releases. But with that said, that doesn't mean a whole lot in terms of greatness overall. It's just not a good film overall. So a minor skip on our Running with Scissors. So with all that said, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies, and the next time we meet, we'll wrap up October with a couple of movies of notable quality to them, including Saw 3, Tim Robbins and Derek Luke starring in kind of an underrated little film called Catch a Fire. We also have Brad Pitt and Kate Blanchett among the cast of Alejandro González Iñárritu's Babel. We have the controversial documentary Death of a President, and we have a movie that some of you may not have heard of, some of you might have, but it's a interesting film to say the least. Romeo and Juliet sealed with a kiss. It's basically Romeo and Juliet with seals, and one of the animators is a notable Disney and Universal animator, and we'll talk about that one on tomorrow's show. But we'll do all that as well tomorrow. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the place on the next page, check out the previous episode, and also don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and notification button, because we post videos here every day, and you get updates on when new videos come out. So, with all that said, I am off. I will see you guys next time, and until then, as always, take care.